What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Bridge to Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Big Mike, with co-host Don Bay, aka Baywatch. Today, we host three-time World Series winner and San Francisco sports mastermind Brian Sabean of the San Francisco Giants. We hope you enjoy this episode.
There we go.
How's it going?
All right. How you guys doing?
Good, man. We're real pumped to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
For those who don't know, Brian is currently the scout for the San Francisco Giants. In years prior, he was the general manager and won 3 World Series with the San Francisco Giants. And he is the most winningest general manager in the history of the Giants organization. Isn't that right?
I presume, but I don't keep track of that stuff.
Who's counting? Who's counting?
That's what I say.
So before we dive into the years with the Yankees and the Giants, really interested in learning a little bit about yourself and your upbringing and involvement in baseball before the majors and working in major leagues.
Well, ironically, I've never drawn a paycheck outside of baseball. One caveat would be when I was at the University of Tampa before I became the head coach. I was the recruiting coordinator actually for all sports through the admissions office and the assistant baseball coach. But that's a long time ago and water over the dam. But I only mention that is in that for some reason, this became my career path early on. I was a 2-sport athlete in college and high school and then chose to pursue baseball solely and ended up at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, in a hotbed of the Florida college baseball scene. Grew up in a working class family. My mom was a waitress a lot of her career and then worked for the state as a topographer. My dad spent most of his adult life in the fire service. So he was much like, I guess, your brother. Early on, he got into that and matriculated all the way to the fire marshal's office and then transitioned, became director of safety at the University of New Hampshire. So very loving upbringing, older sister, 2 younger brothers. We all were into sports. When you grow up back east, and especially in a smaller state like New Hampshire, everybody basically plays everything. You're really charged with playing 2 or 3 sports that fill out the teams. And as such, they were really competitive environments. And interestingly enough, our summers were packed full of as much baseball as we could cram in because you could only play 20 games in your high school season. So our Legion teams would play 50 or 60 games, and then our other summer league teams that we participated in when we were in college or out of high school played up to 70 games, and we traveled. So almost like the model today. Looking back, I probably was more into and a better football player, but then, as I said, matriculated strictly to baseball and ended up in Florida as such.
Was your dad big into baseball, or was that something that you kind of developed over the years?
He loved the game. He played in prep school and then in the service. Interesting story. He didn't graduate. He ended up getting his GED later in life. But during the war, he actually served in the Army, the Navy, and the Merchant Marines, which he was very proud of. So we had that in the background as far as, I guess, the home training or the discipline.
Brian, you were saying that you've only drew a paycheck from baseball. Was that something that clicked for you early? Was that part of the plan, or did things fall into place where you're just like, hey, I'm just, I'm not getting out of baseball?
Interesting enough, my senior thesis was a career goal of being a Division I athletic director. And if you look at the 2 jobs, I guess, being athletic director versus a general manager, they're not completely out of sync and have a lot of commonalities. What happened was I was a very average college player, and early on I knew that. I had also brought to Florida a football injury with my shoulder. So I was looking at limited playing time. Fortunately, the coach at the time, Bill Livesey, who ended up with the Yankees, which is another story, really took a shine to my passion for the game and my aptitude, and kind of grew me as a player-coach type of situation, on the team itself. And as it turned out, I got turned on by that. One thing would lead to another, and I became one of the youngest college coaches in the country at 24 at the University of Tampa.
You led Tampa to the playoffs for the first time in a long time, or in the school's history?
We were in the Old South Sunshine State Conference. I don't know if they still call it that today. Very competitive Division II conference, and the reason I mentioned that is that we played most of our schedule, other than our conference games, were actually Division I schools from out of state and in the state. So we were well seasoned, and it was a difficult task to get to a regional. And we were able to do that in my second year. I only was the head coach for 2 years after being an assistant for 3. And then I moved on in '85 to become a scout with the Yankees. A lot of memories.
How do you make that transition from college coach to being with the Yankees? Obviously, I'm sure in that time you're making a lot of connections, you're shaking a lot of hands. But can you open up about how that connection was made and how you got that gig?
Well, thank you, Bill Livesey. Bill became a cog in the Yankee organization after we had gone to the Small College World Series, and he had left to pursue a career in professional baseball with the Yankees. And there was an opening to become a scout. It was pretty easy when you're making almost nothing, having to run camps in the summer to make ends meet, being chief cook and bottle washer, being the recruiter, didn't have a full-time assistant. You had to do the fields. You had to organize your work study and study hall for your players and stuff. It was quite a task, and I don't know that I would have left or gone into pro baseball if it hadn't been for Bill and my association with him, or more so because it was the Yankees.
Was there some sort of interview that took place, or did you meet George, or how did that whole thing go down?
Well, interesting enough, at the time, Doug Melvin, who had a famous career also in baseball and became a dear friend of mine, was the scouting director. And Bill recommended myself to Doug. And one of the sales pitches, kind of what you mentioned, I had a great network, high school, college, and even with the professional scouts all over the state of Florida. And my first year scouting, I had most of the state of Florida from really Orlando down through Miami. My second year, before I became scouting director in April of '86, I actually, and I can't believe I did this, had all of Florida and all of Georgia, which meant I was on the road every day, 365 days a year, because baseball, much like today, was played every day back then. They actually played more. There weren't the governors at all levels on how many games you could play. So there was fall baseball, there's summer baseball, and there was obviously spring baseball.
Since we're talking Yankees, can we jump into the drafting of Jeter? Obviously, I'm sure that's a long story with many parts, but a pretty pivotal player and something to be a part of discovering that player. Can you tell us about that?
I think the best way to explain it, we probably had one of the most experienced, wide-ranging, skilled scouting staffs at that time on the amateur level. When I say by experience, I'm talking about people that had done not only the draft, but the signing of players before the draft for decades. And we were lucky enough because him being from a cold weather area, got multiple looks in the summer. The area scout from day one, Dick Roach, famously pegged this guy as, somebody that was going to have to be reckoned with. And he actually said in the report that he was probably looking at a Hall of Fame career, which obviously did happen. We were lucky enough, between the weather and him nursing an ankle injury, to have enough information that we were going to run him up the flagpole as far as one of our possibilities of choices. The backdrop to that is Mr. Steinbrenner, from his college days as a college football coach, really impressed upon us. He would rather have a finished product or favored the college player in general, and some of our drafts took that tone. But this was an easy sales job because, Jeter, his reputation preceded himself, and we were able to get him in a position, I think, through all the information that was gathered to make the best decision to take him. And it was a group decision, and one that we all are proud of and cherish.
You drafted a lot of great players, Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada. One famous player I think you were involved in drafting was Dion Sanders. Can you tell us a little bit about that whole signing and what went down there? And I feel like it was kind of groundbreaking in that he played football and baseball.
We could probably write a book on it. He played baseball his freshman year. And I do think that probably was one of his contingencies in going to Florida State, because he was a multi-sport athlete, including a real good Division I quality basketball player, believe it or not. So he played 3 sports in Florida, which is unheard of. Then as he got into the swing of things with the Seminoles and was on track to become, a very high pick in football, he was led away from baseball by Coach Bowden. And his junior year, we had heard that he would like to play that spring, which never happened because, and I think it was strategic, the track team came to him and asked him if he would run the, I think, 220, 440, and 880 relay on a team that could win the national championship if they had him as one of the pieces. And he dutifully did it, didn't play baseball, but that story kind of circulated in our draft room. We said, hey, what the heck? Why not take a flyer late in the draft? Let's put in a pick and then see if we can track him down and see what his appetite is to maybe sign a professional contract, to see how much he really wanted to play baseball and not interfere with the football. That's what happened. Took him in the 30th round. Lo and behold, he really did want to play. Pretty much signed for peanuts, to give him all due credit. And we did some things with a college scholarship and insurance policy that hedged against injury for his football career. And he turned out to be, not Bo Jackson quality, but this guy was legit in 2-sport at the highest level.
I heard a story once, I don't know if it's a wives' tale, that when Dion was growing up, in between, he'd have to walk to school and back home, and in between school and home was a cemetery. You had to go through the cemetery, and it was about a mile long. So in addition to whatever stuff he was doing at school, sports, he would start the morning with a 1-mile sprint, basically sprint the full mile, go to school, walk back home, and end the night with a full mile sprint, and would do that every day. I mean, I don't know if that's just a story, but I mean, it would seem to make sense to definitely make you faster.
Well, I'll tell you how fast he is. I don't know about that story, but when I ran and scouting in the Yankee organization, towards the end of spring training, we had what we call a camp day, where we evaluated everybody's throwing arms, fielding ability, hitting prowess, whether it was the way they handled the bat and batting practice, and more so a home run derby. But one thing that really lit the camp up every year was the 60-yard dash. Now, this isn't the 40-yard dash that football does. But in the 60, if somebody's running a 6.7, 6.8, that's legit above average speed, and it's certainly below that. You're with each tick of the clock down, you get into a world-class area. And as the story goes, Dion wasn't going to run, and the only way that he did run, because he was nursing, I think it was a calf or a hamstring, was that Gerald Williams and Bernie Williams are going to run too. So we decided, because I think everybody in camp, player, trainer, coach, scout, front office person, were betting on the results of what this turned out to be. And lo and behold, they ran. And I swear Dion didn't run for the first 10 yards, because I think he was trying to make sure he didn't blow anything out. And from recollection, and again, him not running the 10 yards, Bernie ran a 6.6, Gerald ran a 6.5, and he ran a 6.4 on really one leg.
Wow.
In cleats on grass. This isn't at the combine on, in the sterile environment.
Turf.
AstroTurf.
Curious to learn a little bit more about managing a player like that, and kind of the background to the conversations that were had between his GM and football. Was there a lot of conversation between both organizations, or was it more hands-off?
I think both parties, being the football side of things and then the Yankee side of things, him being in our organization, we got extremely lucky and fortunate that his agent was a saint and navigated both sides of the fence perfectly. Eugene Parker, who has since passed away, really did a great job to sell people on not only his passion and desire to do both, but to do it at a high level and to have a high level of commitment to him.
Obviously, a lot of great years with the Yankees.
I know we're going to transition from the Yankees soon. I got to ask just a couple more before we go from the East Coast to the West. There's certain things that give you access to a city, right? And when you think of New York and the Yankees, I got to ask, when you're going around town as someone who's part of the Yankees organization, what's that like with just access to the city? I mean, obviously you weren't a player. Could you just, before we catch that flight from the East Coast to the West Coast, what was just that like being in and around New York City as part of one of the most recognizable institutions in the city and revered for sure?
Well, we were highly competitive in the American League East, but we weren't a playoff caliber type of team, and our attendance was I think above average. I mentioned that in that, much like a lot of Giants fans, I don't think or can get a pulse on a city's fan base or how rabid they are until you get into a winning mode. But question, as you went out about town, almost everybody you ran into was a Yankees fan. There was a place, and I think it's still there, ironically, over by Kennedy Airport in Ozone Park, called Don Pepe's, an Italian restaurant, and it was completely run by Italian folks from the old country, as well as an all-male wait staff that didn't speak English. And I was scouting director at that time, and usually on Sundays, I'd try to have dinner there with a group of people. And there was a line out the door. And of course, they let us in and around the crowd. And it was a chalkboard type of place. But these guys were so rabid, they wouldn't let you leave until their shift was over. And then you had to sit at the table with them playing cards and drinking grappa and Zambuca and whatever. So if you were with the Yankees, believe me, not that the Mets weren't without their own fan base, but it seemed that there were Yankee fans everywhere you went.
Oh, so that's awesome. I'm gonna check that spot out. Is it still around over there? And
you'd have to look it up.
Okay.
I think it's still around. I've heard the name Don Pepe's for sure.
Yeah. All right, we can catch that flight now. We can get on that flight now.
So, first question I got to ask is why San Francisco? What's the background story on coming out west? And, were there other ball clubs interested in you?
Full disclosure, I had a chance to go with Bob Quinn and Lou Piniella, Bob Quinn being the general manager to be in Cincinnati, and Lou Piniella being the manager, when they went out and won the 90 World Series. And I had just signed a 3-year contract, which ended up being very restrictive on my end. I didn't get the opportunity to perhaps make that transition or be able to go there. And then really what happened was Mr. Steinbrenner had a power base in New York, being part of the front office in his office, but he also had a lot of the operations being done out of Tampa, where I was located as Vice President of Player Development and Scouting. And I had to commute between New York and Tampa. The safety net, or what was a godsend for me, is my relationship with Gene Michael at the time being the general manager. And then Mr. Steinbrenner got suspended from baseball, and things got very tough to navigate. His son-in-law, who was based in Tampa, Joe Malloy, was really in charge of the organization from afar. I spent a lot of time with him. We probably didn't spend enough time, or as much time as we should have, in New York, or had those people come south to see us. Looking back, there started to be a little bit of friction as to, quote, how we were doing business. And I started to get uncomfortable. And through this process, first and foremost, I didn't want my relationship with Gene Michael, who was the general manager, to have a sour, because he treated me like a son and really baptized me in the game. So as things turn out, Bob ends up getting let go by Cincinnati, and lo and behold, he's in the mix to go to San Francisco, which is a whole other story, because through Joe Malloy to Mr. Steinbrenner, there was word sent that they pretty much weren't going to give me permission to go anywhere. I was the GM in waiting. And believe me, it was a tough decision, not only to want to leave the Yankees for a lot of different reasons, some of which I just mentioned, but more so go through what I had to go through to get to the Giants, because there was compensation demanded. It was a long, drawn-out process, and it did get out ugly towards the end. But everybody famously made up, and one thing led to another. And, obviously thrilled that I made that decision. And, I do consider myself an East Coast guy. because that's where my roots are, and my family's still there. But I don't think I ever thought I'd get into the type of life journey. I ended up in San Francisco and loving the organization, the city, just Northern California, as much as we had all those great experiences.
Yeah, we certainly love you out here.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, when you're going through an experience like that with heavy implications, are you every detail matters? You're staying on top of every item, kind of like putting out spot fires as they're going up? Or are you kind of like, hey, things are going to happen for a reason. They're going to take their course. You know, I'm going to be proactive, obviously, but the things will work out. I'll either be with the Yankees or I'll be with the Giants. Or are you like hey, I'm managing everything along the way to make sure that this is going to happen?
Well, it's a hell of a question, because I tried to and had to keep a low profile for tampering reasons. And to digress, Mr. Seinberg, I think because of the connections in the commissioner's office, actually did want to file tampering charges against the Giants, which I don't think led to anything. The dilemma was, with the situation at hand and him still being suspended, I didn't know if I could bring myself, to want to stick it out and be the next GM, or cut the cord and try something different. The one thing that really drew me to San Francisco, and it happened when I flew out, I was allowed to fly out and interview with Bob Quinn and alone with Peter McGowan, is that I really looked at this as a challenge and almost an expansion type of situation, because the city, the new ownership group had saved the team. And that was very exciting to me. I think I was up for a new challenge. I'd spent 8+ years in the organization, and they're like dog years over there. I wouldn't take the experiences, but they were difficult times to navigate. But I do look back fondly and favorably, knowing the footprint it ended up making on my career, as well as I think it really toughened me up to the realities of the world, in dealing with tough situations, in dealing with a big market, in dealing with trying to turn a ball club around, which ironically ended up happening when I left, because all the players we were able to sign and develop, became their cornerstones for those World Series. So a lot to be thankful for and a lot to be proud of. But it was a tough period of time.
You talk about the tough period of time. I'm sure that involves some growth. How do you get through some of those challenging years where maybe you're not winning as much as you want to, or things aren't going according to plan?
Yeah, starting with the Yankees, we had great personal relationships. Spent a lot of time together, not only in the workplace, because whether it was in baseball or in the Steinbrenner and the Yankees, there were no hours. You literally didn't have to worry about punching the clock, because you stayed as late as you had to. You got there as early as you had to.
Like George, and I had to make one Seinfeld reference, You're the first one in the morning, you're the last to leave.
I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know if we have time, but...
Oh, yeah, we got time.
We got time.
We got time. There was a snowstorm. It was coming in the night before, and when I woke up the next morning, it was tough to navigate, getting into work. And if I didn't run in the morning, I usually went to a diner close to where I lived, and then hit an easy on and off the George Washington Bridge. So ironically, I could get to Yankee Stadium very quickly. So on this morning, I decide it's too treacherous to run. I'm not going to go to the diner. Just go in and get coffee there. My office, being the scouting office, was across the hall from Bobby Hoffman's office, who ran player development. And as soon as I sat down with my coffee, about 8:15 or so, his phone started to ring. It rang and then it shut off. It rang and then it shut off. So lo and behold, I finally say, I'm going to get up and answer this phone. And I run over, I pick up the phone, and the person hangs up. Well, as soon as I hang up his phone, now my phone rings. I pick up the phone and I hear this voice, and he goes, "Who is this?" And I go, "Brian." And he goes, "Kid." He called me Kid. He says, "Where the fuck is everybody?" I said, we got a major snowstorm, and most everybody lived in the borough, or if you lived in Jersey, you lived out. You didn't live along the Hudson River like I did. And he's screaming at me, and he says, "Look," he says, I want you to make sure as soon as Woody Woodward, who is the general manager, gets in, that he calls me. So Woody got in about 11. He had to call me. Well, he went ballistic, including, he said, Woody, he says, starting with you, you're going to stay a minute for every minute you were late getting here past 9. And the only one that's exempt for that is the kid that got there early and answered the phone. So, you know how that ended up. I got my chops busted for weeks.
Oh, man.
Just by the right place at the right time.
That's classic.
That is really good.
Interestingly enough, it drove people together. We had great camaraderie. We didn't worry about each other's jobs. We worried about doing our own job. Broke a lot of bread together, you know, after games or on our own when the team was on the road. And it was great team building. And I think then when I moved as vice president of player development and scouting to the Florida operation, we kind of kept that model going in player development and scouting. And it's you know, one of the things that I hang my hat on that I brought to the Giants that I think really drove our group together and made it so close-knit.
Have you found in baseball, you know, a lot of people that are in the office come from a player background? And do you find that folks that don't have that experience playing, you know, organized baseball or sports sometimes miss out on that team mentality of like, hey, I'm scouting your development, but we're not competing here. If you fail, I fail. I can draft the best player, but if you don't develop that player, then I'm, you know, it's not an ego thing. What are your thoughts as far as coming from that sports background that you've noticed in the business you're in for folks who don't have that background?
Well, more and more it is a business, but I think what drives everybody or should drive everybody is whatever is in the best interest of the organization and the players therein. So you have to put that first. You really have to put yourself last. You are an on-call doctor. You should be plugged in 24 hours a day. You have to juggle that with your family and all other interests, outside interests, if you have enough time. I think once you realize that, you know, the game's so human and it does take interpersonal relationships and the ability to communicate firsthand, check your ego at the door, the easier it is to work together and actually get along and have a lot of fun together.
You obviously manage a lot of big personalities from Barry Bonds to Madison Bumgarner. Can you give us a little background on how you manage some of those big personalities and maybe some of the more quiet ones, you know, like Buster Posey and some of those guys?
Well, pretty easy. You know, I led a charmed life with the managers that I worked with. I don't know if it gets any bigger. I don't know an organization that's had 3 back-to-back, quote, managers, coaches like we did. Dusty, Felipe, Boch, all widely respected in the game by their peers, by the players therein, fans, etc. So what I tried to do is empower the managers and coaches to be in charge of their own space, starting with the locker room and those firsthand relationships with the players. And I kept a lower profile in the press. I kept a lower profile as to how I navigated my time in the clubhouse. And I was a facilitator. You know, if I had to be salt, I'd be salt. If I had to be pepper, I'd be pepper. Most of that was at the behest of the manager in any given situation. And sometimes I had to intervene or set the course. So I proudly say that all 3 of those men who are dear friends of mine, which is maybe what I'm most proud of, I worked beside. You know, I didn't consider them an underling, and hopefully they didn't consider me the boss. They knew I had the final say, but I never tried to, you know, navigate our journey like that. I think that it's a very slippery slope when you try to be the smartest guy in the room or you try to be dictatorial. I don't know that democracy works, but I know that getting everybody in on the first guess to have the best possible guess and eliminate the second guess is really what you strive for. But
did you have toothpicks at your desk ready for Dusty?
I didn't. I wasn't as adept at it as he was. I was afraid I'd swallow one and choke. on camera in my booth. To this day, I don't know how he does it.
I mean, he has to have a sponsorship by a toothpick company because, you know, those got to run out quick. You know, obviously 10, 12, and 14, all amazing years for the organization. Did you feel like you had the pieces going into those seasons, or were those things that developed during the season or middle of the season with transactions and trades happening?
I would say the litmus test, more so I guess what was the signal of what became reality, was the 09 season. We had a good feeling about that team. Younger players and pitchers were bursting on the scene. We had some veterans that were very important pieces in and around that. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think we finished 2 or 3 games out of the second wild card.
Mm-hmm.
So going into the 10 season, we knew we had to tweak some things. But our young pitching staff being so strong, so talented, so formidable, and was going to be together for a long time, including what ended up morphing into a historic bullpen, the core 4 in the bullpen. That's what really set the stage. And then through the 3 and 5, I think the common theme was we brought that wave of very exciting and talented pitchers to the forefront. And then lo and behold, here came the position players. And it became a good mix. Now, did we have to sprinkle in each year depth and replace certain people? Sure. But, you know, we were very pitching centric. I think to this day, I'm tried and true with that philosophy, including in our ballpark. We maximized our ability in that area.
A lot of moments that stand out to me as a fan, you know, obviously Travis's walk-off, Mad Bum's postseason dominance, and Sanchez's win, sending you guys to the playoffs for the first time since 2003. What are some of the moments that you cherish most in some of those big years?
Well, there were times through each regular season that things would happen that would give you an idea that you were onto something special. I'll tell a quick couple stories in that regard. The first one was we went into Chicago in 2010. I don't know if it was a 3 or 4 game series. And we pretty much knew the math. We had to get to probably 90 wins to end up winning the division. We knew that we were going to play San Diego on a weekend. So I don't remember how the series went. We ended up winning the series. But before one of the games, I think it was a night game, the players themselves had a meeting in the batting cage in Wrigley under the grandstand there in center field. And really before the meeting could get off the ground, Renneria, who is, you know,
a legend,
finest people you ever meet, and obviously had a great career, really got emotional and kind of laid out to these guys how he wanted one more taste of the wine. And it was a very, very, I guess, moment of camaraderie, but also it really galvanized us into what we knew we were up against. And then also in that crazy, I guess, demise of the Padres, and then us going into the last weekend, having to win the last game. You know, we were battle tested. I hate to use that word. I hate to use a military term. But what it took to get through that season and then win on the final day of the season, I really think it set a tone for what we were able to do, you know, going into that postseason and winning the World Series. So those type of things in each one of the years that we won something, I think really is overlooked. Losing Cabrera in 12, virtually our best player, and he gets the rug pulled out from underneath him because of the PEDs. And here we go, we're able, with that subtraction, to add Pence, who became our emotional leader, not only in 12 but 14, to replace him. The rest became history. In 14, as much as it wasn't sexy, Peavy acquisition kind of lit the candle.
Mm-hmm.
Each year, there were performances and places in time that you could look back on that really fueled the fire for these guys to have the confidence and the passion to pull this off.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many performances I can think of.
When it gets to the point where you're catching championship parades by accident, you know, I've lived down in LA for 12 years now, but I've always tried to come back and catch games, and I can't catch all of them, you know, and then you're catching a game, you get a flight delay, and you're like, oh, I got to be around for the series winner. What a gift, right? And so obviously it starts to get blurry, all the wins, especially with how dramatic they were. I feel like there was a piece in each one of them. Unbelievable. Obviously, you're responsible for, I don't know how many kids being born and marriages that happened at some of these celebrations, but the list is insane. I was going to ask this, obviously the Moneyball thing was such a big thing and that style of recruiting and all that stuff. But one of the things that was so impressive to me with the Giants, like you were saying, with Pence being an emotional leader, is, I can't think of a team in any sports that better demonstrated different pieces of the puzzle coming through, not just in their stats, but key times picking up the team. How has that been something that you learned as a scout that carried you all the way to a GM and finding those pieces and building a team that really is more than just numbers? It's characters and poetic at some point.
I believe in experience and their expertise. And I believe in leaning on people that have a higher level of understanding and or an ability to evaluate things. And I say that in that I just mentioned how fortunate we were with the managers we had. If you look at the coaching staff, I don't know an organization in any sport that had the coaching staff that we had intact, a lot of them even going back to 2002 in our first trip to the World Series. That's a big part of it. Now, the interesting thing, this is an analogy. This isn't a comment on Moneyball. This isn't about the new age wave of being analytic centric over some older principles. But make no mistake, every organization over time has looked for misfit toys. Every organization has tried to exploit something in the marketplace that isn't being pursued. So let's say, by example, one of the poster childs for the Moneyball sales pitch was Hatterberg. Well, I can go through all these teams, and I can give you 4 or 5 Hatterbergs on each one of our teams. You know exactly what I'm saying, because there were Andres Torres and Blanco and Burrow and on, Renteria, people that maybe weren't household names anymore, maybe haven't had their shot, but were put into a situation that they could have success or flourish or be in the right mix. And the rest is history. And I do think timing of how and when you drop somebody onto a roster and what you can expect from them, as well as, I guess, clubhouse was mentioned, or culture. One of the things that we were very fortunate with is that our older veteran players were still very hungry. And they saw that young pitching staff and what was possible, and they weren't as crusty. They weren't a bunch of old ball busters that made the rookies go through all this hazing. Once they caught the likes of Posey and Lincecum and Kane and Bumgarner and what they could bring to the table, which was helping the team win immediately, they embraced them. It allowed them to settle in. It allowed players that we traded for to settle in. It was a very welcoming environment. And then the bigger common theme that I don't know how you replicate this is that throughout these 3 journeys and 3 World Series, all these rosters not only hated to lose, almost refused to lose, they hated to lose more than they like winning. So they just tried to keep winning. And they put all the other BS aside. And that's very powerful. And I do think, going back to what I said, when you empower the people in uniform to be in charge of their own space and take pride in it and allow them to take ownership, you can set the goals as high as you want. You can have whatever practices in place that you want to pursue, and it gets pulled off in a much easier fashion.
You talk about support and logistics and letting people have their own space. Running an organization, how do you deal with, I'm sure requests come in all the time, right? Like, hey, we need this, we need that. Are you kind of like, hey, you need it, you got it, done deal? Or staying out of the weeds on that kind of stuff? Or, because obviously you guys have budgetary stuff and things like that to deal with. But what was your view on requests coming in from different departments and all that stuff?
Well, I tried to judiciously delegate. I tried to not necessarily get in the weeds unless I had to. Although I knew, every cog and knew every department's way of doing things operationally. But I think that with me managing up and getting in cahoots with ownership, was able to foster an environment that you could have the tools that were needed. We were going to be budget conscious and we were going to spend it like our own. But we were going to set our own tone. We weren't worried about keeping up with the Joneses. If there was something we could do better, you needed to spend some money, we'd make that decision. If we thought we could do something more streamlined. Looking back, one of the interesting things, and I really don't know how it's grown and mushroomed so much, when I started in the game and then when I left the front office after the 18 season, most of our operations were leaner and meaner, being that more people did more things. And now it's much more defined and much more specific and job specific, which I don't know if is good or bad. I always looked at the strength of what somebody could bring to the table, not only their character, but their area expertise and their professionalism and their understanding of loyalty and commitment and work ethic. I'd rather hire the person and then design the job than try to design a job on paper and then hire the person for that job. And we had great success with that. So very proud that Ned matriculated on and went to the Dodgers and had the success he did. Bobby got his shot. But I think in the way we operated together, there was a lot of mutual trust. We challenged each other, including in conversation or meetings. And ironically, we had a lot of long-standing employees, and not many people wanted to leave the Giants. That's a good thing to have going.
As of late, you're back to being a scout for the Giants. It's kind of like a full circle. Is scouting what you love most about baseball, and is that kind of why you're back to doing the scouting?
Well, I guess that's an easy explanation of, quote, what I'm doing or supposed to be doing. In the media guide or on paper, I'm actually an executive vice president still, which I'm thankful that I could retain that title. In a normal year, obviously, going back to last year, if it had been a normal year, I would have spent time watching our club firsthand, home or road, in person, and then get to the affiliates as well as do stuff for the draft. Now, as the result of what happened last year, most of all of this is being done virtually because I haven't seen a live baseball game since March. In fact, I was thinking the other day, I haven't seen a major league game live for the first time, I think, since 1985. So don't appreciate that string being broken, but it was a necessity. But going back to one of the terms or things I said earlier, I consider myself an on-call doctor that can be plugged into for whatever may fit the question being asked, and have a good relationship with Farhan and Scott, and especially good relationship with Zach and Holmesy. This new front office is very energetic. They're very agile thinkers. They're hell-bent to turn this thing around. And I do think that, again, with it all starting with really your amateur scouting and then how you evaluate players, not only in your organization at the minor league level, at the major league level, it is the best thing you can put in motion. And I see that happening here, with the new faces and the new ways of rolling out what their platforms and practices are. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we'll have a normal spring training, normal start to the season, although, who knows with no fans and who knows when we'll start a minor league season. But there'll be a draft, and I'll be available as to, whatever time allows or whatever the logistics around each city or state or around the country.
It's like casino. They may have you as the food and beverage director, but, you're in the mix.
I would rather be in the mix than out of the mix. And I'm still a diehard Giant. I turned 65 in July, and I don't know where the time's gone. So if there's anything I can do to mentor or give back, that's really the best thing that would warm my heart as far as, coming full cycle in my career.
Yeah. I'm sure we could sit here and ask questions all day. I know Dom has a trivia round for you. We got some San Francisco questions that we're going to ask you. Dom, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, Brian. So we do a lightning round. It's a very difficult lightning round. So I got to warn you that these questions are meant to be extremely challenging.
Out of left field.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things I was going to ask you, though, this is not part of the lightning round. If you could have any Giant in right field with a base runner rounding second, heading home with the game on the line, and you need a gun, you need a rifle in your career as a Giant, who's your go-to? I don't know why I thought of this. I saw the vision and I'm like, I got to know, who would your go-to, like, hey, you're done at home. You don't have a chance.
Well, we've had a lot of outfielders.
Yes.
Boy, I think of two because they were really good athletes and did play good defense, although Cruz, being one of my answers, dropped the fly ball infamously in the 2003 series against Miami down in Florida. Cruz had a heck of an arm and was accurate, and Sanders, Reggie Sanders.
A third one that pops in mind for me was McGee. I don't know why I remember this play where Willie McGee just had a rifle out in right field too, just gunning people down. But
I would go with that answer over mine. I thought it was more geared the question to being, who I had crossed path with. He was before I got to the Giants.
That was an old one. So, okay, so here's the questions. We start with preseason, regular season, the playoffs, and then we have the championship round, which means you get the belt. I got to preface this by saying they're meant to be extremely difficult. But for the preseason one, we're going to start with call it a preseason softball. So this is a food and beverage establishment near the ballpark known for pregame, during game, post-game gathering. When you look it up on Google, it describes itself as, quote, a hub for upscale new American dishes, pizza, and drinks, drawing happy hour and game night crowds. Now, here's a hint.
Is this part of your commercial package?
No. This is the trivia, but we show some love for the local areas too.
Okay, I got it.
The name of the spot includes a martini olive in the name.
Martini olive in the name.
And I'll tell you, it's in one of the O's of the name of this establishment. It's near the ballpark, very well known.
And this is in walking distance, literally.
You would have went there for a drink after the game, maybe. This is like the go-to pregame, postgame spot near the ballpark.
Can I give him the first letter?
Yes.
Starts with an M.
Well, this will tell you how much I've been out and about in the last 5 or 10 years. I'm drawing a complete blank. I'm sure when you tell me, I'll be embarrassed. But
we're going to give you a pause on this one. We're going to give you a pause because it's preseason. We're going to move to regular season, okay? An old baseball question. Shares a name with one of the best base stealers in Bay Area history who played for the A's. All right, best base stealer that played for the A's, same last name. This former Giant and A's nickname was Hendu. And he was best known for a 2-strike, 2-out, top of the ninth homer in the 86 World Series Game 5 for the Red Sox. Nickname was Hendu.
Well, obviously Henderson, but I don't remember his first name.
First name was Dave Henderson. The other Henderson.
Obviously.
Okay, here's one that could cancel out the preseason game. This is so difficult that it's just. Which San Francisco Giant was a stand-in as a body double for Robert De Niro in a film about a fan-obsessed stalker? And what was the name of the movie? This is like, he played for the Giants and he was a stand-in for De Niro for this movie that was filmed in San Francisco, around San Francisco.
Oh, God, I've watched the movie. I can't remember the name of it. Clueless with the stand-in. Was the stand-in a bit player of sorts as far as a major league player, or was he somebody that I should know, household name?
He's not a household name. He's a scrapper. I didn't know his name before finding this out, but he was a Giant at the time, and he played for the Giants. He either was a former Giant, and maybe they cast him because of his. Are
you sure this question? Are you trying to bait me on this one?
No.
Are you sure of this answer that you got cooked up? Yep. I can't help you with the movie, and I can't help you with the stand-in.
So the movie was The Fan.
The Fan, okay.
And the player's name was Mike Sadik.
Oh, with a clue, I might have gotten that, but I had no idea that Mike was a stand-in. Mike used to be Giants Community Fund for years.
Oh, yeah?
Good guy.
Very active. Well, hey, you know, we do that for fun, and we make it very
difficult.
Yeah, we make them tough, very
obscure.
Bob Meyer struggled too, and he's another Bay Area GM.
You're giving me too much credit for my brain power. You got to understand, with all this inactivity and the COVID shutdown, I'm kind of in hibernation mode. I need to be out and about.
The answer to the first one was Momos.
Momos. Oh, I thought you guys were talking about spring training.
No.
Well, you know what? I blew that question because obviously anytime I could stop on the way home, especially with boats and we spent a lot of time in Momo's, including when it was the off season, or more so to have a drink before it closed down for the night.
I got a funny story for you before we go. I was actually at Matt Cain's perfect game, and in the 5th inning, I had had several drinks, and the Giants were winning. I think it was 7-0, and so we said, let's take the party elsewhere and continue the night. So we get to North Beach. We're sitting at Michelangelo's restaurant. I have a nice plate of pasta in front of me. I'm feeling jolly and a little drunk. And I get the ESPN notification. Matt Cain pitches perfect game. And we were sick to our stomachs. I cannot believe that I left the perfect game. So we'll end on that note. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate having you on.
I want to just add too, the amount of memories that you've brought for, our listeners, the people of San Francisco, is something that I think very few people can claim to have generated, so many good memories. So for that, we're forever in debt to you, sir. And thank you for your contribution, and thanks for coming on the show.
Let me tell a quick story to that end. I'd mentioned this earlier about fan bases and, whether they're at the ballpark or not. You don't realize how many people are actually following the team, watching it on television, radio, et cetera. So we're being staged for the 2010 World Series parade. I don't know exactly where we were before we had to get the motorcade going. And I was getting in my position with my wife in the car. And Bill Newcomb, who was the presiding managing general partner at the time, walked over the car and he says, look, I'm just going to warn you. He says, I can't believe this. He says, I'm just going to tell you that I think when you turned on Montgomery, he said, you're going to be shocked at how big this crowd was. And he says, I went down because the parade officials wanted to make sure that things were staged right and people weren't going to rush the cars or the motorcade of sorts. And to this day, it's one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had, given to what you just mentioned. And when we took that left and you saw that sea of people and it didn't stop, and it even got bigger when we got to City Hall, you finally realized how big this thing was. I mean, this was not only going back generations, but as you pointed out, sons and daughters and parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, a lot of which didn't get a chance to be there. But a lot of people live through sports and obviously have a chance to do that. Especially the first time when Boch and I get a chance to have a glass of wine, we often reflect on, that first World Series, and it's mind blowing how invested Northern California is for this organization, and we're very thankful, and I'm very thankful. My family is too.
For sure, man.
Well, and on that note, thank you, Brian, so much for coming on the show.
All right, guys. See you.
All right, man.
Thanks, boss.
Yeah, see you soon. Talk soon. Want to quickly thank Brian for coming on the Bridge to Bridge podcast. We had a lot of fun. A big shout out to his son, Brendan, for helping us get him on the show. Ash, shout out to you as well. We definitely had a lot of fun learning more about Brian and how he has been able to accomplish so much living in the Bay Area. Thanks to you guys for continuing to support this podcast. Please make sure to follow us on Instagram at Bridge to Bridge SF. And make sure you tap the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts. Another big shout out to Matt Sordello for production, Kevin Hoffman on images, and Marcus X for the beat.